Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 8 of The Open Shelf. Today, the question is going to be, how do we build systems that get stronger under stress while maintaining a clear direction? I think at the moment everybody struggles with this because of just how crazy the world is we currently live in. All of these new things happening around AI, a lot of what's happening within the tech industry. The aim for this episode is that if you feel that adaptability is something you can leverage within not just your organization as a leader, but within your team, or even the way you think about certain processes and change in general within your professional career. We want to talk to you a little bit about 3 books that we found very, very interesting on the topic. They are very wide, but there's certain sections within them that gives new perspective on how to put true adaptability into the things that you do, even on a daily basis. I mean, every one of us have been there. I mean, we talk a little bit about, the crazy meetings where you just pull in and we need to be more agile. Everybody needs to be more agile. Every single meeting, there's a new strategic direction that we need to do. And the thing is, you can't just say no, because now all of a sudden, you're the one pushing back and, not being more acceptable to change, not being able to respond to economic difficulties within an organization. All of these quote unquote realistic scenarios that we're faced with as tech people, even as leadership within today's day and age. How do we then navigate these waters through the lens of adaptability? And we're going to look at this through 3 focus areas. We're going to look a little bit into culture, how teams learn and respond to new information. We're going to have a look a little bit at change, how strategy evolves while you maintain a specific direction, because nothing really in today's day and age can be considered static for long term. Then we're going to talk a little bit about just code in general, which is more of a technical lens to it, but we want to talk about how technical systems handles complexity to make sure that you have this adaptability not just built into the system, but you can actually manage it across your technical landscape as well. Now, the 3 books we've chosen is The Lean Startup by Ries. We're going to talk a little bit about Radical Product Thinking by Radhika Dutt. And then, as a flashback and a nod to something that both me and Mehdi have read before, and we still think is very relevant today, is The Mythical Man Month by Fred Brooks, a book that was written many, many moons ago, but it's still very, very relevant to today, especially in the context of adaptability. Now, to start us off, Mehdi, we're going to talk a little bit about this whole cultural thing of learning and responding to new information and how we should handle that. And you've got an interesting book for us, right?
That's right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our episode 8 about adaptability, as Willem bring everybody up to speed. This adaptability has become quite important for survival in today's age. And we see that it's one of the principles when it's come to agile, that embracing the change rather than sticking with the plan is one of the principles that make you successful. But how this works, how we can ensure that we are on track, we can focus, we can deliver, at the same time adaptable enough. This is among the most challenging part of agile concept, if you ask me, because how you drive it to ensure that everybody, they have their mental health intact, because everybody, and they emotionally and with everything, they put effort on the project, and suddenly you say, no, this is total waste of time and we want to go another way. It have some impact on the team and how you should navigate those waters. We want to discuss about this kind of stuff and how we should deal with it. One of the most favorite book that I've been through is The Lean Startup, which gives example of his own entrepreneurship journey, that how he stick with the plan and pay the price, and how he learned from it in a way that he make a multi-million entrepreneurship, and he go and pitch this to other Silicon Valley companies. Not only that, up to government, and really project that it was countrywide in US. That book have a lot to offer, and adaptability is one of the key points that he bring it up and discuss about it. One of the example that he mentioned in his book, he start working on entrepreneur like interoperable chat messenger tools that all the messenger can connect to it for the gaming. And he has spent over 6 months to build such a complex ecosystem. And after they bring a client to just see how is their reaction, they were not willing to use it. And he was like saying, if I was sitting at the beach doing nothing and spend 6 months without sleeping and bring this to fully functional stage, it would be the same result because that time go to waste. And if I know they're not gonna use it, I wouldn't make it so perfect, taking all the error away and everything.
No, I completely agree. I mean, how many times, for me personally, it's never really been about client-facing software. It's always been about, my clients have always been internal when we talk about large analytics platforms. But then also, I mean, now we're talking about, getting the source files, getting the data, collating the data, getting everything ready, putting it into a report, and you give it to an executive, and they just look at it and go, okay, yeah, but this is what I wanted. I feel it, man. I would have loved to be on the beach for 6 months.
The frustration after that is really, really big, and he could illustrate it in his book. You could feel him when he say, holy shit, like this was not working at all. This was total waste of time. I would do anything was better than this. And that's how he come with the concept of build, measure, learn. Build something that especially early adopters, they don't like really polished stuff. You give them a CLI, they're happy with it. They go play around with it because this is something new. And early adopters, they welcome things that is not polished, is not ready. And you can solicit some feedback, measure it, see whether it's work or not, and learn from it. And if you want to stick with your approach, whether we want to pivot or something else. And that build, measure, learn cycle was something that he discussed how you can utilize.
I think there's one thing that I realized as we went through the books. I like the fact that all three of the authors name things. Like, for example, so Ries was talking about this, what's called the build trap, where it's this whole thing about you're stuck in this loop where you're delivering features, but if you don't measure that actual impact on the end of the day, this is something that teams find, I would say, relatively destructive, and it can become relatively demoralizing as well, right?
Exactly. And also he was mentioning that for a developer, a good day and productive day is a day that he does not get any disruption and work on something whole day. But whether it's the right way to do it or not is another thing. Because if there is no feedback, if you really don't know what you're building, you're just going to get to the wrong destination faster.
No, fair enough. I mean, we laugh, but I think it's more of a happy, oh shit, we've been there multiple times in our career, right?
Exactly. And how you should make people welcome this kind of interruption, how you should make people to have a skin in the game that, hey, we are in it together. It's not only we define this, and if we deliver this, is going to be a success story, or no, if we deliver the right things, it's going to be the success story. And he built this culture within the team that when he come with a feature, they come and challenge him. Let's do A/B testing, see whether this feature works or not before we really implement it for the whole people. And he said, I was at some point was so pissed that even as an owner of the whole organization, they come and challenge me. But he built such a culture that even developers have room to come and discuss about. And also he discussed regarding validated learning, because what we learn, if we don't validate it and we don't measure it and we don't know exactly what went wrong, how it works, when it comes to pivoting, when it comes to decision making, or you don't have enough data, then A/B testing, coming with the MVP, trying to see how you can test the water before you really jump in was something that he discussed. And there are several nice examples in the book that people was figuring out which direction to go, by this validated learning. And one of them was, I think, food on the table, that one of the example that he was mentioning and elaborating, that the concept was, hey, you want to cook something and you need all the ingredients for that particular things, and this food on the table, they do it for you. And what the team did, like VP of the product and CTO and CEO, was like going and only targeting one customer to see realistically in real world, not thinking, hey, people, what they want. No, let's see only for customers. Personally, they go get all the recipient that she needed, go and personally deliver to her, and learn from that experience. Like she had literally a personal, delivery people.
Yes.
And they learn from that experience, and they make a successful delivery and successful project on top of it, because they never assume something. They go and validate it. And that validation is quite important.
I completely agree with you there, because one of the things that I really like about the book is there's a very strong focus on the scientific method of, have the hypothesis, test it, look at the data, and then make a decision out of it, which I quite like as a very structured approach, because it means that you've got something that you can iterate with and potentially take something and make it better. And then also this whole thing of data really gets muggy as it goes through certain gates. The more gates it goes through, the more chances you have of the data going a little bit weird. And I like the fact, especially with Lean Startup, where the focus is do small things, do experimentation, but don't look at a downstream system for validation metrics of what you're doing. Go to the source. And out of the whole book, as a data person that's not really into sort of like building startups and so on, one of the things that I took out of it was where he said, don't use your analytics system for for your metrics that you want to use for this validated learning. Go to the source and have as little levels as possible to make sure that you get the right things, because you get a distorted picture later on. And he stepped from that into this whole concept of what if you look at metrics as a whole, which is important to any side of business these days. What is actionable metrics that relates to what I need to do now? And then vanity metrics, which is essentially just there that either distorts what we're trying to do, is pushed in a certain direction to support a certain narrative, and very, very clearly distinguish between these two. And I think for teams within our technological domain, this is very important just to have a baseline understanding of, because there's a lot of wasted effort, a lot of wasted money, a lot of sleepless nights, and a lot of mental capacity being put into satisfying vanity metrics. Actionable metrics and validated learning is something that we need to focus on, and that teams feel would be very valuable for them to sort of work on, right?
That is correct. And, also this was something that nowadays the technology is enhanced enough that we can build anything. It's just a matter of effort and price. There is nothing literally that you cannot build. And there was this example that they mentioned in Kodak. They ask, hey, don't say whether we can build it or not. Ask 4 questions. The fourth one is whether we can build it or not. The first question, do customers recognize the problem you're solving? Such a thing exists or not for the customers. Don't try to be like thinking that I think customers have such a problem. No, it's not going to work. If a solution exists, would they buy it? What kind of problem you're solving? Do the customer buy it? And if they want to buy it, are they going to buy from us? Because let's say there are some well-known brands, when people want to do something in that particular category or industry, they have a go-to brand. And if you come to compete with that brand, you might not be having a, smooth ride. After these 3 questions, now the question, can we build it? And this is the way that he mentioned, whenever we want to come up with something, we don't build it first and see whether it works or not. And that makes a huge difference on there, because, it's opportunity loss. When you spend time on something, you won't spend in anything else. That is
Understood.
That is something that, like Steve Jobs was mentioning, when you say yes to something, you say no to 1,000 other things.
Yeah.
And that, yes, it should have enough weight for the organization to work on.
Not just that, but if you put in the effort, I also love the fact that he talks about learning as one of the big things. And this is not something that I see in a lot of the companies that I've worked for in the past, is that every single one of these projects is an opportunity to learn from, you know?
Exactly.
And there's some expertise, some knowledge that can be extracted out of everything that you're currently doing. So have that as one of your critical milestones, is learn from what you're currently doing, you know?
Exactly. And what I like about this book is really have holistic view and discuss about different angles and different dilemma that we have seen in our day-to-day experience, and it's in the years in different organization, they are suffering from one or another issues. And he really deal with a lot of organization, go and discuss with them and try to improve them. And that's what make this book very unique. One thing that he discussed about was type of innovation, and it really attracted my attention because I have seen this over and over again in several organizations that I have been, especially those organizations that they have only one wheel, that wheel running the whole organization. It's called sustaining innovation and disruptive innovation. Sustaining innovation means incremental improvement on the existing product. Like, hey, this is our product. We just want to keep making it better. And it can only go so far. And there are several organizations, they try to go and survive with that model. And some people, they don't even recognize them anymore, like Blockbuster. It's like gone, despite the fact they were a huge player on the market and they thought that they have a wheel that go forever. That was not the case. And it's come to the second part of the innovation, that disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation is a breakthrough product. It's something that, hey, we want to call this disruptive technology, disruptive feature to see whether it works or not. They do a lot of trial and error, not for their whole ecosystem and client. They just target a percentage, a study on it, learn from it, and see whether it have room to introduce new will. And this disruptive innovation, especially for big organization, is not easy things to do. The example
Definitely not,
that,
hey?
yeah,
Sometimes it's just too slow.
exactly. And bringing that kind of mindset that, hey, disruptive innovation for big enterprise is not only important but necessary to ensure that they are surviving for long. And bringing that and welcoming it is not an easy thing. It's like sometimes I have a tendency to ask a question out of the box, and I see it's not welcome in all the organization. And I know the mindset is not quite there. And it's something that they have their main focus on sustaining innovation. And they feel like in order to survive, in order to make ends meet as an organization, they need to have that part of things secure rather than start something new, which is a mindset that, especially in today's age, need to be changed.
Yeah, I worked with a wonderful, wonderful guy called Mark Pettit back in the day when I was still a financial services consultant. And his prevailing opinion around innovation hubs for old school financial institutions was go to a university, pick up 5 or 6 different doctoral candidates, put them into a meeting room, and you throw some of your problems in there and just leave them for a couple of months. And that's all you do. This is your innovation hub. Do not go and spend 20 million and get one of the big 4 consultancies in to now describe and do innovation for you. This is sort of sometimes just doesn't happen. And I mean, he had a lot of experience in massive retailers. One of the first guys that actually worked on this whole switch between when SAP bought Sybase as their backend for S4HANA. And this was his sort of way of seeing the world. Small teams, don't do a big push for innovation. Leave them be, give them a direction to go into, and then you just leave them alone. It's not a massive pivot change for the whole organization, but have a couple of these small little innovation hubs so that you've got some fresh ideas that actually percolate through there. And potentially even some of our listeners listening to this hopefully read some of these books and start one of these very small innovation hubs, because really we've talked about this. Innovation doesn't have to be massive. It can be super, super small scale. And I think the lean
Exactly.
startup also sort of like mentions this where, asking for permission is sometimes something you can get away with if it's small enough. Take a process, take a workflow, do something with it as long as you learn out of it and your people and your team sort of understand how the hell you should be approaching it. Because you might just need to pivot, right, Mehdi?
Exactly. Exactly. And this is something that, it's come in different organizations with different sizes. It come differently. Let's
Mm-hmm.
say when it's big organization, they need to treat it differently. When it's a startup that is a started, they need to act accordingly. When it's come to pivoting, it's also this book have a lot to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave us example in the book that, hey, sometimes sticking with the plan and perseverance is the wrong move and is the worst thing that you can do for some of the things that is not working. You hear that some people push for some idea and something that eventually make them really rich or successful, but is a fraction statistic.
Mm-hmm.
Huge number of people, they persevere and they fail miserably. And he gave the example that persevering is not always is a good thing unless you know what you're doing, unless you have the
Mm-hmm.
data, unless you can back it up, unless you have that learning. And he discussed about how you need to make a decision between pivoting and persevering. And that part also really blew my mind.
I really like it because as a data person, I love the opening line where he starts talking about what the difference between a good pivot and a bad pivot is, where it's like, oh yeah, we're data driven. But then there's so many distortions in the metrics with regards to how things are being done. And I mean, he immediately goes like, yeah, you're sitting in the room and nobody around the table actually understands what the same metrics sort of like mean or where it was gotten from because they need the data warehouse people there for half an hour to explain a simple metric to them with regards to how they do it. And the whole thing about a good pivot being something that is data driven, but again, on actionable metrics, not vanity metrics. And a bad pivot is potentially something where it's just sort of like a panic reaction. You're like, oh crap, okay, cool. This doesn't work. We don't know why it doesn't work. We're just going to like do something else and see if that works. And one of the crossovers that I really, really liked as I was reading through Radhika's book is she actually has like a bunch of symptoms of product related things that a lot of companies suffer from. And sometimes they suffer from one, sometimes they suffer from a lot. But the one symptom she had, as I was reading it, I had a bit of a chuckle, was pivotitis. A pivotitis is essentially building products using, the sort of like the lean startup approach. It's very fast and exciting, but if there's no clear vision, you end up with just like pivoting to the next idea without any clear direction, and you're just going like but there is ways to sort of prevent that, and we'll talk a little bit about that once we start digging into Radhika's book as well.
Yep. When it's come to pivoting, Eric, he discussed about 10 type of pivot. And it was really interesting for me that, hey, when even it's come to pivot, it's not just only changing the direction. No, it's about learning what it works, what doesn't, and how you come up with that understanding. Let's say he
The
discussed
5 whys, right?
exactly. He discussed about
Mm-hmm.
five whys, why things go wrong, and what is the root cause. And when it's come to pivot, like as an example, the first pivot that he mentioned is zoom in pivot. That one single feature in the whole application, it attract a lot of attention. Let's say Instagram is one of the chief example in this category, that they was making an application to review for food and everything, and it was not working. But they see some user, they use the application significantly, and they was asking, hey, which feature they using? They like the image feature, and they pivot and they become Instagram, and it's they sold out 1 billion or so with to Facebook, and that how with one single pivot changed their whole business, make it successful worldwide.
Yes, agreed. It's interesting with regards to how that can actually sort of like change the way you do things and how you can sort of learn from it as well.
Exactly. And this is something that I highly recommend. There are 9 more pivot. Our timing doesn't allow me to just go to every single of them, but I find it really, really insightful. And last thing I wanted to cover from Lean Startup was a concept that they call it Toyota Way. Some Japanese term like Gonzi Gombutsu or something like that. But the whole concept is go and see for yourself. It means when you want to really say something, don't say, hey, the numbers saying so, or a statistic show that this organization did this change and they have better user engagement. It could be a lot of factor. You cannot say only because they did it and they have better user engagement, you do the same things and you're going to have it as well. Go and engage with the client, bring them and solicit feedback. Try to see what is really under the hook rather than assuming it. And that is something that also it's make Toyota. That is one of their key concepts. There are other principles that they follow as well, but this is one of the most significant principle that they make Toyota, and it's known as Toyota way. With that, I pass it to you to give us some insight with the radical product.
It's a very interesting book, and accidentally we came across the topic as we were looking at what Radhika has done in the past and some of the events that she's been doing. And radical product thinking for me is an interesting take that somehow is seen as going against a lot of the things we've been learning in technology. It's I wouldn't say a controversial book, but it does give a very fresh and new perspective. And it sometimes seems as though it's very contradictory to what the sort of lean methodology is or agile as such. But a lot of this resonated for me because how I see the technological landscape is not as a whole. I see it in different tiers of perspectives that has like very specific problems that they need to solve. And radical product thinking for me is this sort of like 10,000 foot strategical perspective that I've always had a bit of trouble defining, but I've always known it's been there, and it fit very, very well into this framework. And for me, this is where sort of like the change focus that we see when we talk about adaptability is very well articulated by Radhika. She talks a lot about why strategy and vision is such a core part of what we do on a daily basis within products as a whole, within a technological domain. And she talks about, what would you consider being a good strategy or a bad strategy? When you talk about something like pivots, for example, her main focus there is saying like, listen, you apply lean, you apply agile, but you need to do it on a very strong foundational so that your team and your company sort of survives these kind of changes and that everybody understands what they do. We talked about Pivotitis, where if you go with the lean startup approach, it's changing directions, you're learning things, but she puts it into a context where she says, okay, if you're a startup, you have a very limited runway, right? There's money, there's capacity. You also have teams that work very hard because there's an expectation for a very sort of like a very high reward at the end of the day. You realistically only have a couple of these pivots within your runway or within the capacity of your people before you run out of both. So how should you selectively build the strategic vision and focus of your company as a startup to make sure that if you pivot, you do it for the right reasons? And it fits so nicely, I think, complementary to the lean startup, because the lean startup, again, for me, is something that is very much a scientific-based approach. And radical product thinking gives me sort of this contextual bubble that can sort of happen in to make sure that you don't just everybody's running in their own direction, but that you have a clear vision towards it. And again, Radhika is very, very adamant about this, that this is not just for the owners of a company. This is not just for my executive or my senior leadership team. This is also something like mini strategies that you can put into place, not just for yourself, but also for smaller teams within an organization, be they big or small, to get you out of this situation where you're dealing with some of these very interesting product diseases. And if you pick up the book, just to open up the product diseases section, just to have a bit of a chuckle with regards to how some of these actually afflict you, it's most definitely one of the most funnest reads I've had in actually quite a while.
That is quite interesting. And of course, this kind of, diseases, so-called, is if you know it, you can find a cure for it. And only knowing it, it's make you able to go to the next step. if you don't know anything about it, of course you don't have the problem to solve that. And bringing this kind of stuff, that hey, there are diseases that you need to find cure for, is quite important, I say.
I would say so. I mean, literally last week, I was speaking to a good friend of mine who is in consumer analytics, and they were talking about the problem in the context that lean startups sort of called it being, they're a feature factory. Like I said before, it's the build trap, right? And then you pick up radical product thinking and you read through it. And Radhika has something called the obsessive sales disorder. And the obsessive sales disorder is essentially just that. No, but we sold this to the client, so you now need to develop this. But, why? Why? No, because they asked for it and it made us the sale. And the sales team is like, oh, yes, good, popping champagne. And then everybody else downstream is just having an absolutely horrible time. But again, it's not just now that you've named it, now that it has an identity, it becomes something that has a life of its own and you can actually address. And that is also something that I quite like about the book, is that it's very, very honest about these kind of things. And it also talks about metrics. How do you measure things? The whole data-driven approach where you have sort of like, your meaningful metrics framework that Radhika calls it, that you can sort of use to figure out exactly if something is either a, let's say, quote unquote, lean startup kind of style, a vanity metric, or an actionable metric that you've got there. So I think it's not for me contradictory. It is beautifully sort of complementary to each other. It's just on different levels that you need to start seeing these kind of things, and different sort of like perspectives. The things that I want to mention about the book is that Radhika supplements this with her website. There's a whole set of artifacts that you can download that guides you through the specific frameworks that she has within her specific toolkit. And even if you don't read the book, download it, because these things help you put the problems you have into certain contextual buckets, which you could then feed into these lean startup processes to make sure that they have the right guidance, even within a small team. There's things about the vision. You start with, the difficult conversation that you need to have when you're clarifying the problem that we're currently solving. And she talked a little bit about, strategy, translating between technical and business teams using a very specific strategical focus area. Prioritization. Goodness, Mehdi, prioritizing things. Like, what do you mean I can't have everything all at once tomorrow morning, right?
Exactly.
Actually having a methodology in there to make sure the very emotional discussion that teams need to have about what to build and when to build it within the constraints we have. And everybody has constraints. Again, we just mentioned like startups, money and people. This is the two main constraints that they've got, right?
Yep, very true.
Execution and measurement, which meaningful metrics fits within this framework as the ground for the debates that needs to happen. And then, of course, the culture is how do you then communicate this, not just to leadership, but the rest of your teams to implement these things as reality, and maintaining this very vision-focused alignment that needs to happen across the company. And this for me is sort of, if we only see adaptability as something that needs to play out over this very vision-driven roadmaps that Radhika took a lot of time to sort of explain to everybody within her book, I think this is a good win, because your adaptability does not play out as just a single push to something that's very short term. But if you have this longer term focus with at least a general direction, you're doing this learning and constantly improving on at least something that's a core functionality that your team can also be behind as well.
Very true. When it's come to this adaptability, prioritization, or several challenges that you go through as a developer, as product manager, as product owner, as a stakeholder and decision makers, or a higher executive. Each one, they have their own agenda, and aligning and understanding each other within the organization is not really easy. When they're coming from different perspective, different expectation, of course, they
Backgrounds
have
even.
Exactly. They have really valid point, but bringing everybody on the same page, that is an art that only some organization can achieve that by proper all hands meeting, by properly mention what is the mission, what is the vision, and articulate it not only once, multiple time, also in winning Jack Welch articulated this, that, hey, you need to bring this vision, mission, and everything several times. So if you wake up one person at middle of the night and ask them, they know which direction you're going. And this is an art. Also within Agile and Scrum, when it's come to adaptability, is different level. And there is this, concept that there are multiple level when it's come to Agile. The first level is, hey, you just know the basic theoretically. And the second level is, now you can just follow it blindly. And the third level is when you can understand the underlying reason and you can adapt it for your own framework and organization and adjust accordingly. You don't blindly have, let's say, a stand-up or a retrospective or planning, but you amend it based on your organization need and you adjust accordingly, which is an art.
Yeah,
And
it is.
when it go to that level, then it starts shining and thriving, which so many people, they stuck at level 2.
No, and I mean we've all seen the. I mean, you start as a consultant in your company, and the very first meeting invite you get is basically the morning stand up for like 7 different teams, which means half your day for the rest of the week is essentially booked out, which is just a filler at some point in time. And sometimes, even if the processes you have don't really fit together all that well, or you're not at that level, you're blindly implementing just to make sure that you're following at least something and not at the point where it's sort of effective enough or helping with efficiency. It's very important to be very transparent about what these limitations are. And if there is sometimes misalignment between specific teams, because every single team has their own vested interest, has their own specific way of working, and sometimes teams don't gel. If you talk to any commercial team with operations and marketing in between, there's always a bit of friction. And that's fine as long as you're very transparent with regards to what this is and what you would like to get out of it. And I think one of the cool things for me as well that Radhika was very straightforward about is that this isn't just something that you do at the beginning. All of these things within the strategic adaptability that you need to do needs to be revised in certain timeframes as well, even more frequently if there is uncertain horizons ahead of you. So don't just do this once, but make this a habit that you can sort of play through and that you can actually take these assets and fill them out as well time and time again as the years move on, because things change, everything sort of moves on in the world we live in. Don't just see things as a once-off. If you want to be truly adaptable, make sure you learn out of it, and then, of course, revisit it from time to time to make sure you're at the very least heading in a specific direction. And then, Mehdi, as we sort of mentioned right at the beginning, the Mythical Man Month. We think about a lot of this adaptability, the rise of LLMs, this whole layoff wave that everybody in technology is currently going through as very isolated new world problems. But then we also have books like the one from Fred Brooks, which was written in the 1970s, revised in the 1990s, that still carries interesting things we can learn that's still relevant to us today. I think the most interesting one for me was the fact that if we talk about, the lean startup has this whole conceptual MVPs, the radical product talks a little bit about, milestones in that case. And then a book in the 70s talks about pilot systems, where it's essentially saying accept the first one you'll create is something you're going to throw away. And the second one you build is actually the one you're going to use in the end, right?
Exactly. This is also is among the classic book when it's come to, technology and leadership. Is mixture of both, is because the author have the background of technical and also had the experience of managing technical team, which make this book quite unique. And he's discussing about his experience and how dealing with challenges in that environment with those even, technology that was not mature enough, things was way more challenging than now. You have only drag and drop and you have the whole fucking library of using it. It was way more challenging. And we are talking about the era that like Jeff Bezos was explaining about one of the first book that they had. If you put negative number to buy a book, they pay you that much money because you put negative and they owe you that so much. And it was one of his favorite books. There were challenges in different level. It was way, way more challenging. And that's why the principle that they discuss about this book is still on today days is very valid, because he really focused on principle and constraint. When it's come to constraint, he tried to also be in a way that can communicate the message that everybody can grasp it. When it's come to delivering faster and meeting expectation, he was explaining that adding more resources to the team does not help, and giving the example that you cannot bring 9 women and ask them you have 1 month to deliver a baby. It's simply impossible. And when you add new people into the team, the whole dynamic of the team is already, dismantled, and they need to focus on the new person, bring it up to a speed, and again the team need to gel together. And each member that you add to the team, you add one layer of complexity into your ecosystem, and it's going to make things slower up until the team is become again get back to the team, which is matter of time. And for short term, there should be the understanding, if you add extra people, doesn't make your project faster, but slower.
No, it for sure is going to make you more adaptable. I like how he's very, like, for example, the two pizza rule. The two pizza rule. And I mean, this gets back to my original quote from the lean startup as well. If adaptability to that sense is something where you want to foster innovation, have small teams that can quickly communicate with each other, where you don't have this very large communication structure, which I normally think big organizations aren't really good with, because communication doesn't really scale all that well. And again, even with the analogy from data that I used a while ago, the more gates it goes through, the more distorted it gets.
Right? Very true. Very true.
What was the other thing that he mentioned with regards to one of the things that I resonate with was complexity is the enemy. Now, complexity for me, it comes down to how he classifies it as essential complexity, which is, if you're building an accounting system, basically the compliance rules and validations necessary for tax is essential complexity. That is something that you need to sort of address. But accidental complexity is something that needs to be avoided as much as possible. And this is purely, well, from his perspective, through very poor decision making. And I think this is where it leans very nicely and complements the lean startup book as well, where this validated learning tries to sort of minimize this accidental complexity as far as possible, because you're constantly having that feedback loop and also being very, very honest with regards to what you're currently doing. And for me, that translates from an architectural perspective into an overall system that is relatively malleable to be able to fit a specific vision, but still not be super, super dependent on any specific, let's say, for example, cloud vendor, but then having your core components very solidly defined, very well documented, and, having them very sort of like fault tolerant and robust. This gives you a bit of both worlds in that you harness this whole concept of having essential complexity that is there because it needs to be, but then also the flexibility up top on sort of like a system or a platform level.
Very true. And also when it's come to this kind of stuff, having the MVP, trying things out quick and dirty, sometimes is the best way to go. I still remember when I was working in Monster with Pet, like in one project, I was trying to be really thorough and putting as much as features and everything. And the example that he was giving me, say, hey, when we want to build something that we don't know how many floor it is, making a foundation for like 15 floor or 20 floor is going to be a waste of time. Yes. Let's see where we are going first. If it's required that, then we go and make that foundation. If let's say you want to make 1 story, 2 story, building that foundation is a waste of time and resources. Still, I recall that example.
I agree with that one. I mean, we've all been there where every new feature looks like, oh, that's going to be the cool one. That's going to be the cool one. And before you know it, you just have this whole smorgasbord of things that you've spent a lot of time on, and you feel sort of like a very strong sense of ownership on.
Yes, and the principle of do it simple and stupid is sometimes is resonate with me, because in my career I came across so many complex design that the complexity caused such a delay and even not working as expected. Let's say suddenly team want to go for like microservice architecture for something that it does not require to be that complex. And not only it helped that complexity, it adds so many layers. Then when you want to do something, it make your life miserable. That you say, hey, doing it simple and stupid is sometimes is the best way to go. Then if it require you refactor and enhance it gradually, incrementally and iteratively.
No, I completely agree, and I couldn't have sort of like said it better as well. Hey, if we to sort of wrap us up here, for me, I think these three books have very unique opinions. And if you want to look at the lens of adaptability through, having a very strong culture that's there to learn, being open to change that is relevant and that has direction for either a surgical team or an innovation team or even a cross-functional team, and then having the sort of like the technical systems behind that supports the code of your organization. You've got three solid books here. They cover much more in a much wider aspect, but I think at least for our core principle of adaptability, these are definitely a good read. I would also sort of heavily recommend this to any of our listeners as time very well spent. And I mean, adaptability isn't reactive. It's just about building systems that get stronger under stress while it moves us to a clear goal. And these three books sort of help us get there. What do you think, Mehdi?
I totally agree with you. This three book also gave me another set of eyes. And when I revisited, let's say, for the Lean Startup, I went through it a couple of years ago. And when I revisited for this podcast, I see there were so many stuff that at that point of time, because I did not live in that world, I could not resonate with. And what makes a good book when you revisit it, still it have a message for you, and it gave me a lot of new messages in the new read. And let us know in the comments, what do you think about these topics, and when it's come to adaptability, what is your favorite book?
Oh yes, definitely. Well, we'd love to put them on the list and maybe have a look at them in a future episode.
Exactly.
Mehdi, as always, thank you, sir. And thank you to everybody for listening, for spending your time with us. We really appreciate it.
Cheers, everyone. Bye.